My First Quilt Show is brought to you by Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Aurifil, perfectly suited for every quilt project. Hovels, cut it close with Hovels. OmniGrid, providing quilters with specialty rulers and accessories for over 30 years. Riley Blake, colorful, playful, and sophisticated fabrics that can't help but bring a smile to your face.
Hi, I'm Sara Gallegos. Thanks for watching My First Quilt Show. Today I'm going to show you how to create a simple block, the 9-patch, that you've got lots of options. You can do lots of fun things with it. And here is a 9-patch right here. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's a block created of 9 patches of fabric. You could do them all scrappy. You can do them in contrasting colors like I have. You can even create secondary patterns with it in entire quilts, and I'll show you an example of that at the end. But what we're going to create today is this 9-patch block. Now, instead of creating 9 separate squares and sewing them together, we're going to do this the fast way with strip piecing. We will be creating 2 sets of 3 strips of fabric that we'll cut apart, sew back together, and you get a 9-patch. So you need one strip set that has gray on the top and bottom and an orange on the inside, and then one set that has orange on the top and bottom and a gray on the inside. So I've already done one strip set here where I have the gray on the sides, or the top and bottom if I flip it around, with the orange in the middle. So now we need to create the opposite of that with the orange on the top and bottom and the gray on the inside. Now I have cut 4.5-inch strips, and you could do this with any size strip that you want. We're doing a big block on this one. So I'll piece these together with a 1/4-inch seam. Adjust my fabrics to keep all those long raw edges together. Quick cuts. And now we have the first part of the strip set. Now I'm going to add the second orange strip to the other side of the gray. Again, I'm just matching those long raw edges and stitching with a 1/4-inch seam. All right, so there we have it. So we've created our strip set, and now we need to press the seams, and I like to press toward the darker fabric when I'm doing this. And what's nice about this, having a dark and a light, if you always press your seams toward the darker fabric, it'll give you the ability to be able to nest your seams so you get perfect points as you sew your blocks together. And I'll show you exactly what I mean about that. So first I'm going to take the iron, and I like to just run right down the sewn seam just to set it. And then very carefully open it up. And I've got my seam facing toward my darker fabric here. And I'm going to give it a good press. Now this is the kind of a learning thing here. You want to make sure that when you're pressing your seams that you're pressing them, not ironing. When you press, you're lifting your iron and placing it onto your seam. And you can kind of get into the seam allowance a little bit, but you just want to make sure that you're not ironing against your seams, because that will stretch your fabric and distort your seams. You can end up with crooked units, strip pieced units, and it can also stretch out the fabrics, and then they won't nest nicely when you try to sew them back together. So I've pressed one side. Now I'll do the opposite side. Again, just kind of run down that seam to set it. Open it up. I've got my seam toward the dark fabric. I'm just going to press it. And I'm just going to give it one nice quick press top and bottom again. There we go. So now I have the 2 strip sets that I need to create the block. 2 separate sets. So I'm going to move my block out of the way. I started with 4.5-inch strips of fabric. And when you use a 4.5-inch strip, you're going to finish out at a 4-inch block in your pieced segments. So we need to cut our strip sets also into 4.5-inch strips. So you end up cutting everything 4.5, and after you take away those 1/4-inch seam allowances, you end up with 4-inch finished segments within your block. Now, I've already done the work and cut those, but what you would do is just line up your straight edge of your ruler, make sure it's nice and straight, and cut 4.5-inch segments, and you'll get several out of each strip set. And then you can position them. So I've got orange on the top and bottom, gray in the center, just like that. And now I'm going to sew this in 2 segments. I'm going to flip one side over the other. And what you can see here is that I have pressed my seams on this piece toward the dark, which is in the center, and on this piece toward the dark, which is on the outside. And again, that's going to allow me to nest those seams. So if I just kind of finger press, I can line up the straight edges in the seam, and I can see that my seam allowances where they're folded are just kind of kissing each other, and it feels nice and flat in my hands. Make sure that the second seam is nested as well. And of course, you can always put a pin in this or a clip just to make sure that it stays nice and straight as you sew it. I'm going to sew it without pins because I'm going to trust myself to hold it nice and straight. But if you're just beginning, it's not a bad idea to make sure you put a pin in those seams just to hold everything together. It is important to make sure you take the pin out before your needle gets to it. You do not want to sew over pins with your sewing machine. And I'm just kind of feeling as I go to make sure that my seams stay flipped in the right direction. All right, so there's my first seam. And look how nice, because I nested, they lined up perfectly. My little corners are perfectly matched. So now I'll add the third piece on. And once again, I'm just going to nest those seams and hold them nice and straight together. And stitch down the long edge. All right, so here we have our completed 9-patch block. And at this point, you would just want to give those seams that you just sewed a nice press. And again, pressing, making sure you're not ironing and stretching it out. All of my points line up perfectly. So I've actually created the opposite of this block. And what's fun about 9-patch blocks is you can put them together in lots of different directions. You could continue on like this. You could add a sashing to it. Sometimes it's fun to create secondary patterns. You could have all of your oranges going this way across your quilt. There are a lot of neat things that you can do with a 9-patch block. And if you look it up, Google 9-patch block, you'll see all types of different variations on it. One fun thing that I did, kind of a work in progress, this is a modified 9-patch, but it makes the entire size of a baby quilt that we'll add the binding to in a later episode. But what I did was I created 4-patch blocks. So instead of 9 pieces that I sewed together, I only sewed together 4 in each of these blocks, and then I cut my 5 orange blocks and put them together like a big 9-patch. So it's a modified version of a 9-patch quilt. So you can do a lot of really fun things with 9 patches. This was actually created with the Charm Pack. We talked in an earlier episode about those 5-inch Charm Pack squares, and it's already pre-cut for me. Took a lot of the work out of it. All I had to do was sew them together and create the quilt. So I hope you've learned a lot today about the 9-patch and that you'll experiment with it at home. And come back and see me next time on My First Quilt Show.
My First Quilt Show is brought to you by Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Aurifil, perfectly suited for every quilt project. Hovels, cut it close with Hovels. OmniGrid, providing quilters with specialty rulers and accessories for over 30 years. Riley Blake, colorful, playful, and sophisticated fabrics that can't help but bring a smile to your face.